Okay, Tina, we're ready to go.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tina Dove, and I am the Director of the National Opportunity to Learn campaign. I'd like to welcome you to the first official OTL campaign webinar. Education Redlining, How Children Across America Are Denied an Opportunity to Learn and What You Can Do. This is the first of many webinars that will be offered by the National Opportunity to Learn campaign over the coming months. We encourage you to stay connected with the campaign and all that we are doing by subscribing to our biweekly newsletter, liking us on Facebook, or following us on Twitter. At the end of the webinar, I'll show a slide with the information you'll need to help you do this. If you'd like to join the Twitter feed for this webinar, please use the hashtag #EdRedlining, which is seen on the screen in front of you. You can follow me at OTL Campaign DIR. You can follow the OTL campaign at OTL Campaign, or you can follow our friends at ProPublica at ProPublica, all of which are on the screen in front of you. Before we begin, let's deal with some necessary housekeeping issues. First, if you are hearing my voice and seeing a screenshot slide on your computer, then you are logged in correctly to our webinar software. If you experience any technical problems during the webinar, please use the chat function, which can be found on the right of your screen. At the drop-down menu, giving you options of recipients for your chat message, pull down the name Andrea Garvey. She is the person who will be troubleshooting all technical questions. If you have questions you'd like to pose to the presenters, you can ask them via the chat function to the right. Choose my name from the pull-down menu, and I will do what I can to get your questions asked during the Q&A period. If you want to share thoughts and ideas with other participants throughout the webinar, make sure to choose all participants from the pull-down menu. We are so excited to have as our presenters today Michael Holzman, Senior Research Consultant for the Schott Foundation for Public Education and the author of the recent report, A Rotting Apple, Education Redlining in New York City. He is joined by Jennifer LaFleur, Director of Computer-Assisted Reporting from ProPublica, an independent, nonprofit newsroom that produces investigative journalism in the public interest. So let's go ahead and get started. Redlining refers to the unethical, sometimes illegal practice of limiting residents' access to vital services in certain communities. In June 2012, the Schott Foundation for Public Education published a report called A Rotting Apple, Education Redlining in New York City, which highlighted the wide disparities in the opportunities to learn available to New York City students, both between community school districts and from school to school within them. Sadly, redlining is not simply a New York City phenomenon. Similar situations are taking place in cities such as Philadelphia and Chicago, and across a number of different states, including California, Texas, and Ohio. Over the course of this webinar, we will discuss redlining across the country, resources to help you assess if and where it is taking place, and action steps you and other education justice advocates can take to expose redlining and put an end to it now. Without further ado, Michael Holzman.
I plan to use the one moment, please. There we go. I plan to use the Education Redlining report about New York City as a way of describing how you might do this sort of thing at home. We have adapted the term redlining from what we hope was the former practice of banks to draw red lines on maps around neighborhoods that they plan to offer less than favorable treatment. Wells Fargo just settled a case about that. You saw a version of this in the report. The opportunity to learn is a calculation describing the chances a student has of studying in a high-performing school, defined by the New York City Department of Education's own testing program. Students in poorer New York City neighborhoods are redlined. They have less of an opportunity to learn in a high-performing school than those in more prosperous neighborhoods. The income differentials in New York are quite startling. This is the neighborhood corresponding to high-performing Community School District 26, which has 100% opportunity to learn score. The average income here is about $80,000 per year. Note the large group of families at the 200,000 mark. This neighborhood corresponds to Community School District 7, where students have no opportunity at all to learn in a high-performing school. The median income is $23,000, and most families are clustered at the extreme poverty level. This slide is from the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. The quality of education is dependent on teacher quality, and although we can debate about that, in general, we want to have highly educated teachers. Certainly the parents of children in high-income areas would support that. So would those in low-income areas. But as you saw, we found that in New York, this opportunity is not there. For the New York study, we converted teacher experience and education levels to income amounts using the salary matrix in the teacher union contract. Most districts use those, and in many cases they are available on the web, or if you shout loud enough, you can get it from the District of the Union. New teachers are usually assigned to schools where the students are most in need of experienced, highly educated teachers. Another form of redlining is restrictions in access to programs with enriched resources, such as gifted and talented programs. As is known to any Psychology 100 student, giftedness, higher intelligence, is evenly distributed throughout the population. Programs for the gifted, however, are provided on the basis of family income, race, and ethnicity. New York City is particularly egregious in this regard, not even testing most of the city's most impoverished students, giving them no opportunity at all. Although in today's case, Washington Post, there was an article about a similar situation in Fairfax County, Virginia. Here is the ratio between white and black students in gifted and talented programs in the 50 districts with the largest black enrollment. Note that Montgomery County, Maryland has reached equity. Many of those districts with the highest ratios of white to black students are in the South. There are actually two kinds of redlining, that within districts, as we have seen for New York, and that between nearby districts. We have found that in many parts of the country, well-funded, higher-performing suburban districts form a donut shape around a less well-funded, less highly performing urban district. Material for this chart is from The Dropout Crisis by researchers at the Johns Hopkins University, who comment at that, this was in 2004, average per student spending $4,500 per pupil higher in suburban majority-minority high schools than in New York City. And the lowest spending suburban district spends more than the average per pupil in the New York City high school. The Evanston-Chicago contrast.
Michael, I'm sorry for interrupting. If someone has put a phone on hold, I think that might be someone's hold button beeping at us. Go ahead, Michael.
Here's another way of looking at those donuts. Student progression from grades 9 to 12 is a proxy for high school graduation rates. So you see that the suburban districts with higher per student funding have higher graduation rates. Mount Vernon is a school district that borders on the Bronx. Walking simply across the district line increases graduation chances for black students, particularly for boys. It has, Mount Vernon, which is a largely black district, has the same per student funding as does schools in the Bronx. Here we see the unequal distribution of teacher salaries nationally. Philadelphia is notable for the differential between teacher salaries in schools with high and low minority enrollments. The zero line indicates equity. This is within district redlining. Here begins a brief lesson on how to do this sort of thing at home. Buffalo, New York once had good schools. It doesn't anymore. I looked at real estate websites to find a suburb identified as having good schools now. One good place to look for such information is at real estate websites. Most states have readily accessible report cards providing data for schools, districts, and the state as a whole. Many look like this. This one is for a high school in Buffalo. Another good source for information is the U.S. Census. On the first data page on the U.S. Census website, we can do quick facts. Here are quick facts for Buffalo. It is 39% black and has an average household income of $30,000 a year, near poverty for a family of 4. The school report card for that Buffalo High School that we looked at before shows that the average size of English classes is 30. Class size is related on the one hand to financial resources and on the other hand to education outcomes. Private schools attended by the children of the 1% typically have class size of 8. The school student body is almost entirely black. The suspension rate is 55%. That's the equivalent of more than half the students having out-of-school suspension once a year. Teachers in the school don't stay long. Nearly half will be gone in 3 years. And the students don't graduate. The report card says 47%, but I imagine the grade 9 to diploma rate is probably under 30%. That was the donut hole. Now let's look at the donut. Buffalo is in Erie County. The county is 28% black, and the average family income is $47,000, which is within shooting distance of the national average. This census data includes Buffalo, so if you subtract those, the non-Buffalo figures are better. Williamsville East High School is recommended as an area by real estate agents. The average size of English classes is 24 rather than 30. Suspension rate is 6%, not 55%. Attendance is 94%. Teacher turnover rate is 7%. And the graduation rate is 99%. And we know where he went. Here's another resource for donut hunting. This is the part of the U.S. Department of Education that compiles data that schools send to the district offices and those sent on to the state education departments. Here is the front end of their machine for getting data out. You can specify school years and state, district, county, or school data. It lets you look at enrollment data in various ways and has some interesting financial data. However, most of that lags by a year. The U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights publishes interesting data every few years. It's a sample of about 1/3 of the districts in the country. At the moment, only the top 2 tabs work. The others are under development. You can look both at districts and at schools. Average teacher salaries are a good indicator of resources available. Here's a school in Jacksonville, Florida. The enrollment is 98.5% Black. Average teacher salaries are lower than the district average. Here's another school in the same district. Enrollment is 31% Black. Average teacher salaries are higher than the district average. And that was a quick introduction.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Now we know that what redlining is and what it looks like in our schools and communities, and Michael has shown us a few places that we can go and collect the data that'll help us determine if it's happening at your children's schools. Let's continue this part of the conversation by looking at another major resource that you can use to discover where opportunity gaps exist. Let's now turn the presentation over to Jennifer LaFleur from ProPublica.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to be here, and I just want to do a quick check that you all can see my presentation. So if those of you who have phone access could let me know, that would be great.
We can see them, Jennifer.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit first about what ProPublica is. We are a fairly new nonprofit newsroom. We do investigative journalism in the public interest, so we try to do stories where we can affect change, and part of that means that we make a lot of data available on our website. And last year, one of those projects where we made such data available was our Opportunity Gap education tool, which used the Office of Civil Rights data set to look at access to particular programs. And we built this tool so that we could use it, other journalists could use it, and then the public could find out about schools in their areas as well. What we found is in some states, looking at the trend of access to certain programs and against poverty, which we found was a better proxy for looking at a gap for us, there were some states where there was very little difference between poor schools and wealthier schools when it came to opportunity to get into advanced AP classes, advanced math, advanced science. And in other states, there was a clear difference between higher poverty schools and lower poverty schools. And we used as a proxy for poverty the percent of students in that school getting free or reduced lunch, and the item in our analysis was at the school level. And this is just an example of what we did with the states, and I'll do a little bit of live demonstration of this in a minute. But for each of those programs, AP classes, gifted intelligence programs, advanced math, physics, and chemistry, we looked at that relationship between poverty and access to these programs. So the very red squares mean that there was a big difference in high poverty versus low poverty schools. In other words, as poverty went up, and this is one example from Maryland, you can see along the bottom as poverty goes up, or percent free reduced meals go up, the percent of kids taking AP classes goes down. And so we made this chart so we could look at states and rank them by the strength of that relationship. In other states, we found almost no relationship. In Florida, for example, kind of across the board, and this chart can kind of show you you don't see that downward trend line like you did in Maryland, that there was not that relationship. I will say, however, that the data we looked at in our original opportunity gap did not look at outcomes. So in that data, we did not know how the kids were performing. We plan to look at that in coming months. A little bit about our methodology. We use the data from the Office of Civil Rights, which Michael showed you the site for. We did find several problems, actually many, many problems in the data, which we corrected by contacting schools directly. For example, we found schools that offered 22,000 different AP courses, which is not really possible. So we had to do a lot of corrections in the data before we could use it. So we looked for those impossible values, too many AP courses, schools where there were more teachers than students, and other things that just couldn't logically be correct. And we corrected them either by contacting the district or the school directly or by eliminating them from that part of the analysis. We looked at the percent of students in advanced programs, AP, advanced math, advanced science, and we compared that to students qualifying for free or reduced price lunch. Not only did we kind of do overall trends on our site, but we also made it possible so that an individual could look up a particular school and compare that school to nearby or high and low poverty schools. For example, here I just put in Palo Alto High School as an example. The original search will give you the information for that school, comparing it to the state and the district. So 6% of the kids at this school get free or reduced price lunches, and 30% take at least one AP course. 31% take some sort of advanced math, and then the racial breakdown is at the bottom. So we can compare that to nearby schools, which, for example, if you look at Sequoia High School down there in Redwood City, there's a lot more kids getting free and reduced price lunches there. Also, much lower percent of kids taking AP courses there as well. The other comparison we can do is to low and high poverty schools in your area, and I'm actually doing this with a different set, Dallas, Texas. So you can see that Highland Park High School, which has basically no kids getting free and reduced price lunches, has a very high percentage of students taking at least one AP course. North Dallas High School, which has a much higher percent of kids getting free and reduced price lunches, has a lower rate of of kids taking at least one AP course, though higher than you might find in other areas. Again, the two sources of the data that we used was the civil rights data collection, which we spent a great deal of time cleaning and checking and correcting, and the National Center for Education Statistics. As Michael showed you, that Build a Table tool, we use that to pull the kids getting free and reduced lunch numbers. We also pulled overall statistics just to compare this data to the Office of Civil Rights data, just as a double check. So we used it in two ways. Okay, and I'm just going to go online to our site quickly. And again, that's probably hard to see the URL, but it's projects.propublica.org/schools, and I believe that will be available on the website afterwards as well. So there's a couple ways to navigate through this site. One might be to actually click on a state and drill down to the various school districts that way, and get overall information about the state. And that's really just drilling down. Or you can search for a specific school, zip code, or city. So I'm going to search for Kansas City. Okay, and so I find North Kansas City High School, and I get the profile for this school, the percent of teachers and inexperienced teachers. We define that as any of these items in here that have an underline, we have a little pop-up that defines what that means. So by inexperienced teachers, that's the percent of all teachers who are in their first or second year. And then we get the overall data for that school. So the percent of students getting free and reduced price lunch, along with the state average, which is the 34%, and the district average, both on that same bar. And the percent taking at least one AP course, again with the state average and the district average. Okay, so I can then compare this high school to nearby schools. And depending on where you are, if you're in a very rural area, those nearby schools may be pretty far out because we needed to, basically get the closest high schools in an area, so they're comparing similar schools. So here are a few schools from the Kansas City area with different free and reduced lunch percentages. So this one down here, as you can see, has very high free and reduced price lunch numbers and very low AP. So that's an example where those kids are not maybe having the same access to programs as kids at lower poverty schools might. And Kansas was one of those states where we found a pretty high relationship between poverty and access to programs. We can also compare it to low and high poverty schools. Although Kansas City, this is Kansas City, Missouri, so I spoke by saying Kansas on that. Although a few Kansas schools may come up on this search, so I apologize for that. And so what we see is this is a high school that is very low poverty in the state, Roosevelt High School in St. Louis, and is comparing low and high poverty schools in that state. North Kansas City High School, which is our school, and then a school in Wildwood, Missouri, which has very low free and reduced lunch, to see if they have different levels of access to some of those programs. So advanced math is pretty level across the board. You do see differences with the access to percent AP program. Okay, I think I need to open it up for questions, so that's all I have for now, but I'm happy to show more things on the site afterwards. Oh, I need to give my assignment.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. This is an amazing resource, and we are fortunate that ProPublica has given us yet another weapon in the fight for education justice and equity for all of our children. So we promised that this was going to be interactive, and we want to make sure that we're getting questions and answers from you all that you might have to our presenters. So if you have questions that you want to raise, please send them through the chat function. And also you can send them through the Twitter feed. We're using the hashtag #EdRedlining, so feel free to send questions there, and I'll be monitoring those. And you can also send them to @OTLCampaignDIR or @OTLCampaign, and we can get the questions there. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with the first question. It seems to me that both of your presentations, both Jennifer and Michael, talked about socioeconomic status, and that the data that you both were looking at to talk about redlining pointed to socioeconomic status and used that. But many people argue that socioeconomic status and race and ethnicity are directly correlated. So my first question, Jennifer, I'll start with you. Is there a connection, and from your research and what you've done, do you see a connection between race and ethnicity and redlining?
We looked at race as well, and I should have said that. We looked at several demographics along with poverty levels. What we found is that there was a stronger relationship in most cases with poverty than there was with race, and so what we found was that that opportunity gap existed in very poor white areas as well as in poor areas that had high minority populations. And because the question is right, there's often correlation between those two variables, you run into problems if you put them both in your analysis. So we chose, because it was a stronger relationship in most places, we chose to go with poverty, but they're right. There is a relationship in many cases with race as well, but mostly because of that correlation with poverty.
Michael, do you have anything you want to add to that one?
I would put that more strongly. The recent Pew Charitable Trust study showed that most families in the lowest 20% of the income distribution are Black and Hispanic in equal numbers, and that most Black families are in that bottom 20%. The opportunity to learn is an artifact of school quality, which in turn is by and large dependent on financing. Real estate tax school-based school finance determines that school quality, and thus the opportunity to learn is determined by family income. Family income is, I know that this is not a popular position, but family income in the United States is by and large determined by race and to a lesser extent by Hispanic ethnicity.
Okay. So, Michael, kind of an extension of that question then, what would happen, since you also were the author of the OTL report that looked at the opportunity to learn and discussed the opportunity to learn index and looked at what the opportunity to learn was for children across the country, what if you controlled for socioeconomic status? What would the opportunity to learn, chances for opportunity to learn look like for African American students compared to white non-Hispanic students? What would that look like, as well as what would that look like for Hispanic students as well?
You see, socioeconomic status as a term is a way of obscuring the issue. We're talking not about some kind of merger of income, class, and race. I think we are talking about race. And that if we hold income steady, then we'll see that the distribution of the opportunity to learn is racially determined. The Hispanic issue is a very complicated one. If you look at second-generation Hispanics, they differ very little in opportunity to learn or educational attainment from white non-Hispanics. So the issues affecting the Hispanic Latino population in the United States is basically one chiefly of those who are born outside the United States, and therefore reflects the quality of education offered in their country of origin. Cuban Americans show very little difference from white non-Hispanics, even in the first generation. Immigrants from Chile, immigrants from Argentina, also it's immigrants from lesser developed countries that have an educational deficit on first arrival, but as I said, this again is very rapidly overcome.
Okay. So we've gotten a couple of questions in from our attendees. Thank you so much for sending those in, and I want to encourage others, if you have other questions, please make sure you send those in. We've got a question from Courtney Hardwick. She wants to know, for a person who'd like to do a report on successful schools in the area, what are acceptable proxies to use to figure out the number of students that are lost at transition points, especially between middle school and high school, if that number or data is not available? So I'll pose that to both of you.
I'll leave that to Michael, actually. I would have to do more reporting on that myself to experts to figure out what they would recommend.
I was going to leave that to you. What I would do, the place I would start would be with the National Center for Education Statistics Common Core of Data Build a Table facility. And what you can do with that is look at grade level enrollment in successive years. And typically what you'll see is a big bulge in grade 8 and then a drop off in grade 10. But you should further disaggregate that by race, ethnicity, and gender. And that would give you a good start if I understand what the question is.
Courtney, if that wasn't the answer to the question that you were looking for, or you had a follow-up, please send that in to us and we'll get that taken care of. Towards the end of, and this is sort of a researchy, wonky kind of a question, I know that a lot of the participants on the phone are from rural districts. Some of them may have small numbers of students in their schools, so the N number for doing sort of the statistical analysis, et cetera, might be small, and or maybe their data, the information from their school may not have been counted into the OCR data, et cetera. So for schools that are in that situation, how do you go about trying to figure out if redlining is happening at your school? Like, are there ways that they can still sort of do some investigating and figuring out whether or not this is taking place at their children's schools?
Well, I would say, having done some more local analyses, having worked at newspapers and states, one thing we did, because again, and I should have mentioned, in our analysis, we use the OCR data, which cuts off at districts with 3,000 or more students. So tiny districts will not be represented in that data. So if you don't find a district, that may be why. Also, what we used when I worked, in one state where we had one contiguous state to work with, is look at the State Department of Education's school test score data. I know that questionable how important that is, but that's one place to start, and comparing that to some of the demographic numbers could be helpful to just kind of give you a starting place. So Michael mentioned, those school report cards can be very helpful.
The school report cards are very useful. Some states have extraordinarily rich statistical resources. You can, again, go to the Common Core of Data. That goes down to the school level. And you can look at students in special programs, which is one of the items that shows up on the menu there. Or you can just go to the school and ask them, do you have AP classes? Who's in the AP classes? Do you have gifted and talented programs? Who's in those? They'll get very embarrassed. That sort of thing. Also, a category, two other categories that are important are out-of-school suspensions, and the Schott Foundation is about to launch a national campaign for a moratorium on those. Out-of-school suspensions are a completely inappropriate activity for schools, and in many cases, in almost all cases, are badly skewed in favor of, against, how do you say that? Many, many more black male students are given out-of-school suspensions than white students. In the states along the northern border, the border with Canada, those will be Native American male students who are given out-of-school suspensions disproportionately. And in the West, of course, there are Hispanic students, Mexican American immigrants. So you can go down to the school level again with the National Center for Education Statistics. You can go to the school report cards that are on the state website, and you go to school and count folks.
Okay. So let me piggyback on that. Michael, you gave me a great segue to an article that was published today in the Washington Post about Thomas Jefferson School in Fairfax County, Virginia, which is a science and tech school, one of the top in Fairfax County public schools. And the article discussed basically that Black and Latino students are being shut out of this very prestigious science and tech school. So I wanted to sort of ask you if, based on sort of my read of it, it seems like there could possibly be sort of a redlining connection. There could clearly a race and ethnicity sort of situation happening there. Just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, and if there is a connection between redlining and this issue.
Well, as I said with the New York City instance, this is blatant redlining. It goes all over the country, and the parts of the country that have the greatest histories of racism are most egregious in this regard. You get 5, 10 times as many white non-Hispanic kids in gifted and talented programs as black kids in many of the southern districts and in places like Chicago and New York City. It creates, I guess you in some cases you might have within school redlining that way. Not only in gifted and talented programs, but in advanced placement and honors programs. The Shaker Heights study that was done a number of years ago that gave rise to myths about black kids not wanting to act white by learning turned out to be actually an artifact of teacher attitudes who would place black kids in easier classes because we don't want to make you feel badly. And that, unfortunately, that has not gone away. And you can see it at the growth level in state statistics, and you can see it drilling all the way down to the school level all around the country.
So, again, Michael, you set up another great question from one of our participants, from Sandra Pesco. She wants to know, how does the special education student population figure in with this data? Do you have a sense of what percentage of the student body are special needs students in the high AP participating schools versus low AP participating schools? Jennifer, I'm going to field that one to you. Do you have a sense of how this all correlates with relates to special education students?
No, because we did not look at that, but that definitely is one of the variables that is in the Office of Civil Rights data set. So it's you know, one could look at that through that data. We just did not.
We've been looking for last few years at special education, particularly classification as mentally retarded, and this has now been changed to something else by the OCR. But in any case, it tracks everything, all the other indicators, that what you get are extraordinary numbers, particularly of black boys, put into the mental retardation classification. At one point, the Boston public schools had 14% of their black boys classified as mentally retarded. That means they were saying that 14% had IQs under 70, which is totally absurd. The definition is with IQs at that level is 1.5%. And we brought this to the attention of a new superintendent, and they changed the directions to the people who did this classification, and the rate dropped down to 5%, I think. So you can look at those classifications, and again, that's available, I think, both on the OCR and on the Senate Common Core of Data, and there's something parallel to that, I believe, on most school report cards.
So we've got two questions that have come in from two different attendees that are very similar to each other. Kat Johnston asked the question, and so did A. Michelle. Kat Johnston's question was, and this is for both of you, Michael and Jennifer, based on the information shared today, could you please share how you envision various education stakeholders ideally responding to possible redlining? And let me extend that question a little bit. A. Michelle also asked, we all recognize that there is a connection to community development and sustainable growth and the access to resources for neighborhood schools. What policies and planning strategies can we recommend considering the current political dynamics that stand as a barrier? So it looks like the question is like, what are education justice advocates to do? Given that these circumstances exist, what is there to do? What policies or how can they begin going about addressing these issues if they find this to be the case in their areas?
I found one of the most moving instances of this work was something that happened last year when a group from the local NAACP, I believe that was what it was, in Nashville, Tennessee, got up in a meeting of the school board and waived one of our reports and said, out-of-school suspensions in this district are outrageous. We want you to change the policy. And they did. So I think that that is that kind of grassroots work, actually going to the board and getting them to change their policies is a very effective thing. And to facilitate that, we're actually going to be putting out a print edition, I believe, of the Redlining report, which will be available on Amazon, so people can actually wave it around rather than waving their iPads. Secondly, there's a deeper and a much more difficult issue in that much of this is dependent on income tax, local income tax school funding. And there is no constitutional provision for that. This is the only country in the world that does that. There are a couple of states that have gone to statewide equalization in various ways. Vermont is one. Massachusetts does it in an interesting way by the state topping up local funding differentially. And I think that kind of work at the state capitol can also have a profound effect. Jennifer?
Well, we really just put tools out so that people can use our data, so we don't really advocate for anything or tell people how to advocate for anything. So I would stick with what Michael said and hope that our data can help in that somehow.
Well, Jennifer, let me ask it from this perspective. Are you, as a reporter, are you seeing or hearing about groups on the ground who are sort of, how are they responding to these kinds of things? Because I mean, the ProPublica tool has been out for a while, and I'm sure that people saw it, used it. I'm hoping now after this webinar, now more people know about it, that we'll see an increase in grassroots advocates using it. But have you seen, as a person, as a member of the press, have you heard of stories of folks using this kind of information to take action in their communities? And if so, what kinds of things have you heard about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably had fewer users up until now, hopefully, using it for that purpose. I think most of our users were individuals interested in their school or local media, and I think that was a really important thing of what we did, getting data out to local media so that they could do their own stories on their schools.
Okay. So we've gotten a question in from Latanya Stanyan. I hope I didn't kill that name. I apologize. She says, the same study by Ogbu also discusses how the theories of voluntary and involuntary minorities and the fear of acting white for African American students prevented some African American students from reaching their full academic potential. How do you factor this into your interpretation of school test scores, and how do you think this theory holds any value?
I think he misinterpreted his data. I think that the data showed that those class assignment decisions were being made by teachers. They weren't being made by students. The test score data is a difficult one, a difficult question, and we only have a very few cases where black students have had an equitable opportunity to learn. And Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland is one of those. And in that case, and that it's only one case, so it could be a special situation, but it's very encouraging. The test scores have risen, the achievement gaps have narrowed, the graduation rates for black students have increased, and the completion of college rates have also gone up markedly. And this was attributable to a vast increase in early childhood education funding, preferential funding for high-need schools, intensive teacher professional development, summer school programs to get rid of summer learning loss, very high enrollments in advanced placement classes for all groups of students, and other good things like that. So I would think that, again, that's only one case, but if we get more cases like that, we would begin to have a theory of what to do. On the interpretation of the OGBU data, there's a researcher named Gillum at Yale who did a study of preschool discipline issues. And he noticed that 4-year-old black boys were being expelled from preschools in Connecticut at astronomical rates. And he went into the schools and he looked at what was going on. And he then put in place a professional development program for the teachers and said, now here's how you can deal with a 4-year-old who's causing trouble. And once they had appropriate teacher professional development, that differential in expulsion rates disappeared. So I think that a whole lot of this, certainly on the discipline side in the Texas study, which the Justice Center demonstrates this irrefutably in terms of discipline. And I think that the OGBU study, rightly interpreted, demonstrates in academics that what we have is at least a two-part problem, which is a two-part solution. One part is this very odd school finance issue, and the other part is an enormous need for teacher professional development.
Okay. We have another question from Sandra Pesco. Do the current federal education reform policies support the proliferation of charter schools and STEM exacerbate redlining? And
yes.
that go for either one of you.
Yes.
How so?
They're actively supporting charter schools. The Secretary of Education is a cheerleader for charter schools. And that creates redlining situations, and that the charter schools, many charter schools, are creaming, and they're raising resources from people who, for their own reasons, would rather give to charter schools than to public schools through the taxes. And that exacerbates redlining. When charter schools began, the early people advocating for them, such as Debbie Meyer and Sykes Legal in New York, were advocating for public charter schools because they thought that the central district offices were not educationally helpful. But the key issue was the fate of the child who had no advocate in his or her family. So whenever a charter school says, well, we want a commitment from the family, you're excluding those kids. And the objective point of view in any situation is the point of view of the least powerful person in that situation. So the objective point of view in the situation of charter schools is this 8-year-old boy or girl whose parents, for one reason or another, are not willing to go to bat for them. And the charter school movement is leaving that child behind.
So Jennifer, here's an interesting question again, sort of as our investigative reporter. It's often the case that these things are sort of happening in different schools across the country, that you know, parents and community members recognize that these things are happening, but it's oftentimes very hard to elevate the voices of these people to to raise the level of concern so that it doesn't just end up seeming like this is an isolated incident at a school in Jackson, Mississippi, or a school in Philadelphia or whatever. It's difficult to build a narrative, a national narrative, and get the press to pick up on it or to get the press to report on it. And ProPublica is such a unique entity in that, you know, your very nature is to do investigative reporting like this. How do advocates engage the media and press outfits like ProPublica and others to tell the stories of these people on the ground and to elevate these stories so that it doesn't look like it's just an isolated incident in a small town in Florida, but that this is a national phenomenon happening?
Well, if a news organization is hearing about an isolated incident in a small town in Florida, that's what they're going to think it is. So pointing toward studies and data that actually kind of magnify the issue can be very helpful. Though keep in mind that, you know, newsrooms are teeny tiny compared to what they used to be. You know, the newspaper I used to work for in Texas, you know, probably has 1/8 of the number of education reporters that they had 8 years ago. So they're, you know, what they can do is less. So providing tools and information, you know, that provides that widespread perspective, I think can be really helpful. You know, that's kind of why we do what we do with data, so we can give local reporters tools to do more.
Well, that's actually a great segue, Jennifer, for the next part of this webinar as we're closing in on 3 o'clock, and that is, you know, we're all riled up now. We know redlining is happening, and it's time to talk about action steps. So we know now that redlining is real and that it's happening, and we've got a number of different resources that we can use to figure out if it's happening at our school and in our community, et cetera. So what now? What do we do to put redlining to an end, and how can we sort of act on behalf of our kids? So first and foremost, one of the things that we can do to help raise the level of awareness about the issue of redlining is to share the Schott Foundation's redlining report and make sure that people in your network know about it. Let them know that while the report focuses on data out of New York City, that you now know of tools and resources that can be used to determine if it's happening where you live. Also, and this sort of points to what Jennifer was just saying, in terms of doing your own investigating and making sure you have data, if you are armed with the information from Michael, and if you're using the ProPublica Opportunity Gap tool and the other websites that were talked about today, you can go ahead and conduct your own kind of an investigation in your area and see if the phenomenon is happening where you are, in your community or in your state, and be able to begin to build an argument that this is not isolated, that it's happening in other places. Next, you can also document it. Michael referred to this earlier when answering a question. Go to the schools where you suspect that redlining is taking place and document what you see happening there. Take pictures and video of the disparities that you're seeing at the school. If you live in an area where there's a donut and your town is the donut hole, document what's happening at the schools in the donut. Be able to show and prove that the discrepancies exist. Share your videos, and you can share them with the OTL campaign so that we can help show others what's happening to your schools in your area. And we'll gladly take on any photos and videos that you have, and we'll share them with other advocates. Sounding the alarm is also something that we can do. Get on the agenda of your school's PTA meeting. Hold a community meeting or a town hall. Present information at your local civics club. Let others in your community know that this is happening where you live and that it has a negative impact on the whole community. Have a community conversation about how you can work collectively to stop redlining from happening in your children's schools and to your children. And don't forget about the youth in your community. Since they are the ones who are on the front lines of this education justice battle, make sure that you're engaging with youth organizers in your community to stop education injustice. There are a number of youth organizing groups that are part of the OTL campaign. And if you visit our website, you can find out if they have chapters in your area. You can also sign the petition that we have on the OTL website. If you visit the OTL website, you can print out the model petition that can be sent to, a model petition that can be sent to your education officials telling them to stop redlining your schools. The more people you have sign the petition, the greater the force you have to show your public officials that you intend to hold them accountable for making needed changes. And we'll have model petition language on the webinar website after this webinar. Next, you got to hold your public officials accountable. Armed with the results of your investigation, your signed petition, and your fellow education justice advocates, contact your local public officials, your school board members, mayors, city council members, county supervisors, your state elected officials, federal officials, all of them. Show them the results of your investigation and ask them why this is taking place. Get them to commit to concrete steps that will put an end to redlining in your schools and communities. Given that this is an election year, many public officials will be holding public events aimed at engaging with their constituents. Bring your group and your demands to one of these events and force them to discuss how they intend to address your concerns. Sort of like what Michael said earlier, carry the redlining report in, wave it around and demand action. Publish your own redlining report. Is there a university or a think tank or a public policy group in your area that publishes reports? Approach them about working with your group to publish a redlining report about schools in your area or state. This will add to the growing amount of research confirming that this is happening. This research can be used in your advocacy effort as you work to raise levels of awareness and build the public will to make change. And finally, you can join the OTL campaign in your area. If you don't have one, start one. There are already OTL advocates in Massachusetts, New York, Arkansas, Wisconsin, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Pennsylvania. If you live in one of these states, connect with the OTL advocates there and join your voice with theirs. You can visit the OTL website to learn more about who you can contact in order to join the effort. If there isn't an OTL campaign in your state where you live, start one. OTL is a national campaign, and we'd love to have you join us. And you can contact me directly, and we can talk about how to make sure OTL is where you live. If you've not already done so, we encourage you to sign up to receive the bi-weekly OTL campaign newsletter. You can do so by visiting the OTL website at www.otlcampaign.org. You can also visit us on Facebook and Twitter to find out the latest news and information from the OTL campaign. Tell others in your network to visit the website and join in our efforts. We want to know what's going on where you live, so please send us news articles, event notifications, or anything else of interest to info@otlcampaign.org. Your feedback is so important to us and will help guide our future programming and topic selections. In the coming days, you're going to receive a survey asking for your feedback about this webinar. Please take a few moments to fill that out and return it to us, and we thank you in advance for helping us with this. The OTL campaign intends to host other webinars in the future on topics such as youth organizing, the school-to-prison pipeline and school push-out, the Shop Foundation's upcoming release of the Black Boys Report, state and local level school funding and revenue issues, parent organizing and community engagement for education reform, and how to use racial equity impact assessments. If there are topics you'd like to see us cover, or if you'd like to be a webinar presenter, please contact me and let me know. Also, the recording of today's webinar will be available on the OTL website tomorrow for those folks who were unable to join us today. On behalf of the OTL campaign, I'd like to thank Michael Holzman and Jennifer LaFleur for joining us today. And thanks to all of you who signed up to participate in this event. We hope you found this information useful to your advocacy efforts and look forward to hearing about your next steps to raise levels of awareness about education redlining and other conditions that deny our children the opportunity for a fair and substantive opportunity to learn. I'm Tina Dev, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.